The big white mansion stood at the end of a long driveway, hidden behind tall iron gates. The garden was wide, filled with bright flowers, trimmed hedges, and a fountain in the middle. Expensive cars sat in the garage, polished until they shined in the sunlight. Inside the house, marble floors and crystal chandeliers showed the kind of life only the very rich could afford. The owner of this place was a man named Richard, a self-made millionaire who worked day and night building his empire. He was always in a suit, always on calls, and always busy. Money was never a problem for him, but time was, especially time for his family. Richard's most precious person in the world was his only daughter, Lily. She was 14 years old, with light brown hair and big eyes that carried a gentle warmth. But she had been born with a disability that made it impossible for her to walk. A wheelchair was her companion every day. Even so, she had a smile that could brighten the whole house. She loved books, music, and the feeling of the sun on her face in the garden. She often watched the other kids running and playing from her bedroom window, wishing she could join them. Her mother had passed away years ago, so it was just her and her father in the mansion. Because Richard was often away on business trips, the staff became like Lily's extended family. The head housekeeper, the chef, the gardener, they all cared for her in their own ways. But one person she saw almost every day was Samuel, the groundskeeper. He was tall, strong, and kind, with skin the color of rich earth and a deep voice that made people listen. Samuel worked hard to maintain the gardens, repair things around the property, and keep the estate running smoothly. He lived in a small cottage nearby with his teenage son, Marcus. Marcus was 16, smart and quiet. He didn't have the luxuries Lily had, but he was proud and independent. Sometimes, while helping his father with work in the garden, Marcus would notice Lily watching from her wheelchair. At first, they only exchanged polite smiles. Then, one day, Lily started talking to him about the books she was reading. Marcus wasn't much of a reader, but he listened because he liked how her eyes lit up when she spoke. Over time, their short talks became longer, even if they were careful not to be seen chatting too much. The truth was, Lily's father didn't know how close the two had become. Richard believed in keeping his world and his staff's world separate. He wasn't rude to Samuel or Marcus, but he didn't think of them as equals. To him, they worked for him, nothing more. But Lily didn't see the world like that. She didn't care about money or class. She liked Marcus because he treated her like a normal person, not like a fragile doll in a chair. On that particular morning, the sky was bright blue and the air warm. The mansion was full of movement because a small weekend gathering was planned. Richard had invited a few business friends, their families, and some neighbors. The swimming pool had been cleaned, chairs arranged around it, and trays of drinks and snacks prepared. Samuel had been working since sunrise to make everything perfect. Marcus came along to help carry boxes, move furniture, and make sure the garden looked fresh. Lily sat near the window, watching everyone prepare. She loved when the house felt alive like this. The sound of laughter and the clinking of glasses made her feel part of something, even if she couldn't join in all the activities. She could already hear the faint splash of water from the pool where the first guests' children had started swimming. She imagined what it must feel like to jump into cool water, to swim freely without limits. Later in the morning, Marcus passed by her window carrying a large basket of towels. She called out softly, "Marcus!" He stopped and turned, smiling when he saw her. They spoke for a few minutes about the busy day ahead. Lily teased him, saying he looked like he was working harder than everyone else. He grinned and said he didn't mind. Helping his dad was part of his life. She asked if he'd be near the pool later. He said yes, and she told him maybe he could sit and talk with her when he had a break. He nodded before hurrying away to finish his chores. By noon, the mansion was buzzing with guests. The smell of grilled food floated in the air, music played from speakers near the pool, and bright sunlight danced across the water. Lily's father was already deep in conversation with a group of men in suits, laughing loudly. She sat in her wheelchair under a large umbrella by the poolside, wearing a light summer dress and a wide sun hat. A tray of juice rested on the small table beside her. From where she sat, she could see the other kids splashing in the pool, their laughter filling the air. Marcus moved around, carrying drinks, refilling bowls of snacks and helping his father fix a loose chair leg. Every now and then, his eyes would meet Lily's, and they would exchange quick smiles. She felt safer knowing he was nearby. She knew if she needed something, he would come. But she also knew her father wouldn't like to see Marcus hanging around her too much. The pool looked beautiful, the clear water reflecting the bright sky. Lily kept glancing at it, feeling a strange pull. It wasn't the first time she had been near the pool, but something about the heat of the day made the water look even more inviting. She wished she could dip her feet in, just for a moment. She looked around at the adults. They were busy talking, not paying attention to her. Marcus noticed the way she stared at the water. He hesitated, then walked past her slowly and whispered, "Careful, it's slippery near the edge." She smiled faintly and said she knew. He walked on, but something in his gut told him to stay alert. The mansion, the wealth, the sunshine, everything looked perfect from the outside. But Marcus had a strange feeling in his chest, as if this peaceful afternoon could change in an instant. He didn't know why. He only knew that sometimes trouble came without warning, even in the most beautiful places. The afternoon sun was warm and golden, making the pool water sparkle like glass. The sound of splashing mixed with music and the low hum of adults talking. Lily sat under a big umbrella at the side of the pool, her wheelchair carefully positioned so she could watch everything. She wore her favorite light blue dress, the one that made her feel fresh and happy, and a straw hat that shaded her eyes. The smell of grilled meat and freshly baked bread floated through the air, making her stomach rumble. Guests moved about with drinks in their hands, talking in small groups. Some were sitting in lounge chairs, others were by the barbecue. The children of the guests were laughing and playing in the pool, their bright swimsuits flashing in the sunlight as they jumped and splashed. The air was filled with joy, but Lily felt a small ache in her chest. She wanted to be in that pool more than anything. She imagined herself swimming, feeling light and free, instead of trapped in her chair. Marcus was moving around, helping wherever needed. He carried trays of snacks to the tables, brought extra towels for the kids, and refilled water pitchers. Every now and then he looked in Lily's direction. She noticed that he always seemed aware of her, even when he was busy. He didn't stare too long, but his eyes carried a kind of quiet watchfulness. Samuel was working too, carrying crates of bottled drinks from the storage room. He kept telling Marcus to be careful with the trays, not to rush, but Marcus could tell his father was already tired from the morning's work. Still, Samuel moved steadily, never complaining. Lily's father, Richard, was at the far end of the pool, sitting with his business friends. He laughed loudly at their jokes, sipping from a glass of cold lemonade. His attention was completely on them, not on Lily. She didn't mind. She was used to it. She knew her father loved her, but his world was full of deals and meetings, not long conversations with her. As the afternoon went on, the music got louder. The kids' games became wilder, with water splashing in big arcs. Lily smiled at their energy but also felt nervous. She was close to the edge of the pool, and every now and then a wave of water would splash near her wheels. She had the brakes on her wheelchair, or so she thought, but she didn't check them again after moving earlier. Marcus walked past her carrying a tray of fruit. "You good here?" he asked quietly. She nodded and said, "Yes, just watching." But he noticed her gaze drifting again and again to the water. It was like the pool was calling her. A group of boys started playing a game where they ran along the edge of the pool and jumped in. One of them brushed past the back of Lily's chair as he ran. It wobbled slightly, and she felt a tiny shiver of fear, but she didn't say anything. The boy didn't even notice. He was already laughing with his friends. Marcus saw that little movement of the chair. His eyes narrowed for a moment, but someone called him to bring more plates, so he walked away reluctantly. He kept glancing back every few seconds. Lily shifted in her seat. The sun felt stronger now, and beads of sweat formed on her forehead. She reached for the juice on her small table and sipped slowly. The cool sweetness refreshed her, but her eyes stayed fixed on the water. She could see the sunlight breaking into 1,000 little diamonds on its surface. She thought about dipping her hand in just to feel the coolness. The laughter around her grew louder. Some of the adults were clapping along to the music, a few even dancing near the barbecue. Everyone seemed caught in their own fun. No one was looking closely at her. Marcus returned with a stack of towels and placed them on a chair not far from her. He gave her a small smile, then bent down to adjust something on the lounge chairs. She wanted to talk to him, but hesitated, not wanting to get him in trouble for standing around. One of the younger kids, a girl with curly hair, came up to Lily and asked, "Do you want to come closer to the water?" The question made Lily's heart race. She almost said yes, but before she could answer, the girl's mother called her away. Lily watched her run off, feeling a strange mix of disappointment and relief. Marcus noticed the moment and walked closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Be careful," he said, glancing at the water's edge. "It's not as safe as it looks." His tone was serious, but he smiled to soften it. She nodded, though deep down she wasn't sure if she could resist the pull of the pool for much longer. A light breeze blew across the yard, making the umbrellas sway and the surface of the water ripple. The smell of sunscreen and grilled food filled the air. Somewhere in the distance, a bird chirped, its sound almost lost in the noise of the party. From where Marcus stood now, he could see the angle of Lily's chair. It was closer to the edge than he liked. He thought about moving it back a little, but Samuel called for him from across the yard to help carry something heavy. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then turned away to do as his father asked. The pool sparkled under the bright sky, the voices around blending into a steady hum. Lily leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees, her eyes locked on the water. She imagined sliding into it, the weightless feeling as the water held her. In her mind, she was free, moving without effort, no chair, no limits. But reality was still around her. The slippery tiles, the busy crowd, and the fact that she couldn't swim. She told herself she would just watch, nothing more. Yet something in her heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, she could get a little closer. Marcus, across the yard, felt a sudden unease. He didn't know why, but his steps quickened as he started making his way back toward her. He glanced at her father, who was still talking and laughing, completely unaware. The poolside looked calm from a distance, but Marcus knew how quickly calm could turn into danger. He hoped he would reach her before anything happened. The heat of the afternoon made the air heavy, and the tiles around the pool were warm under the sun. Lily sat in her wheelchair, still watching the moving water with quiet fascination. The children's laughter echoed in the background, and now and then drops of water from their splashes landed near her feet. She didn't notice how close her chair had shifted toward the edge during the past hour. A group of boys started running along the side of the pool again, playing their game of jumping in at different points. One of them, a tall boy with wet hair dripping down his face, ran past her quickly, his bare foot slipping slightly on the wet tile. As he tried to keep his balance, his shoulder brushed against the handle of her wheelchair. It wasn't a hard bump, but it was enough to set her chair rolling forward a few inches. She felt the slight movement, but thought the brakes would hold. She had locked them earlier, at least she believed she had. But earlier in the day, when one of the staff moved her chair to adjust the umbrella shade, the brake on one side had been released without her noticing. Now, with the uneven lock, the chair could still move forward under the right pressure. The small roll forward made her heart jump. She instinctively reached for the brakes, but before she could secure them, another boy ran behind her, brushing against the back wheel. This time, the movement was enough to send the front wheels of her chair dangerously close to the edge. Her hands shot out to stop the motion, but the tile beneath her feet was wet, and she couldn't grip the ground. Marcus was across the pool, carrying a box of empty glasses toward the kitchen. His eyes scanned the crowd as he walked, and then they froze on Lily. Something about her posture, the slight tilt of her chair, sent a jolt of fear through him. Before he could call out, it happened. One of the smaller children, chasing a ball, ran between Lily and the pool's edge. In the rush to grab the ball before it rolled into the water, the child bumped the armrest of her chair with surprising force. The momentum pushed her forward, and in that instant, the unlocked side brake gave way completely. The front wheels tipped over the edge, and Lily's body lurched forward. The sensation was terrifying. One moment, she was sitting in the warmth of the sun, and the next, Her stomach dropped as the weight of her chair pulled her toward the deep blue water. The bright sky flipped in her vision as her body tumbled over the edge. She didn't even have time to scream before the cold hit her like a shock. The wheelchair sank instantly, its heavy metal frame dragging her down. The straps on her legs, meant to keep her secure in her seat, now became a trap. Water rushed into her mouth and nose, burning as she gasped in panic. Her arms flailed, but she couldn't push herself free. The sunlight above the water looked far away, rippling and blurring. Marcus heard the sharp splash even over the noise of the party. For a second, it didn't register with the people around him. To them, it was just another jump into the pool. But Marcus had seen the way she fell. His box of glasses slipped from his hands, shattering on the ground, and he sprinted toward the water. Around the pool, no one reacted fast enough. Some kids stopped playing and stared. A couple of adults turned their heads lazily toward the sound, still mid-conversation. No one screamed. No one ran. The moment stretched painfully for Marcus as he covered the distance between them. Under the water, Lily's chest burned. She tried to twist in her chair, tried to push at the straps, but her arms felt heavy, her body slow. Panic spread through her like fire. She thought of her father, of her mother's face in the old photos, of all the mornings she had dreamed of doing something as simple as swimming. The pool that had looked so inviting now felt like a deep, endless trap. Marcus reached the edge and saw her beneath the surface, the wheelchair sinking deeper, her hair floating around her face. Her eyes were open, wide with terror. Without thinking, he kicked off his shoes and dove in. The cold water closed around him instantly, but he ignored it. All he could see was Lily. The moment he went under, the noise of the party above turned into muffled echoes. The world became a blur of blue and silver light. He swam hard, his arms pulling him down faster, his lungs already tightening. The weight of the wheelchair made it harder to get to her, but he forced himself on. He reached her just as her hands went still, her body starting to slump. He grabbed the back of the chair and tried to pull, but it was too heavy to lift straight up. Thinking quickly, he unclipped the safety straps holding her legs. It wasn't easy, his fingers fumbled, the cold numbing them, but after a few desperate seconds, one strap came free, then the other. The moment her legs were loose, he pulled her into his arms and pushed away from the chair. His chest screamed for air, but he kicked with everything he had, holding her tightly. He felt the pressure in his ears lessen as they rose, the light above growing brighter. They broke the surface in an explosion of sound and air. Marcus gasped, drawing in a huge breath, and turned Lily's head to the side to keep her mouth clear of the water. She was limp in his arms, her eyes closed, her lips pale. He shouted for help, his voice cracking with urgency. Some of the adults finally reacted, rushing toward the edge. Marcus swam with quick, sharp strokes, every movement fueled by fear. The water felt like it was pulling at them, but he kept going until strong hands reached down to grab her under the arms. Together, Marcus and a worker hauled her onto the pool deck. As he climbed out after her, water streaming from his clothes, he saw her lying still on the tiles, her hair plastered to her face. The party had gone silent now, all eyes on the girl who had been laughing only moments ago. Marcus dropped to his knees beside her, his heart pounding so loudly it filled his ears. He knew that if she didn't breathe soon, everything would be too late. Water pooled around Lily's body on the hot tiles, mixing with the sunlight in tiny glistening drops. Her chest didn't move, her face was pale, and her lips had a faint bluish color. The world around her seemed frozen for a moment. People stood still, their laughter gone, their voices caught in their throats. Only Marcus was moving, his breath fast, his hands trembling as he shook her shoulder. "Lily, can you hear me?" he shouted, his voice sharp with fear. But there was no response. The sound of dripping water from his clothes filled his ears, each drop hitting the ground like a clock ticking down. Some of the children stared, wide-eyed, not understanding what was happening. A few of the adults gasped, but stayed back, their hands over their mouths. One woman muttered something about calling for help, but no one rushed forward to actually do it. Lily's father was still at the far end of the pool, his phone pressed to his ear, his brow furrowed in concentration. He hadn't yet grasped the danger. He thought it was just another splash in the pool. Marcus looked around desperately. "She's not breathing," he yelled. His voice cut through the music and chatter like a blade. Now, some of the guests began to move, but too slowly, their steps hesitant, as if they weren't sure whether to get involved. Inside Marcus's chest, panic fought with determination. He remembered the safety class he had taken at school months ago. The instructor had shown them how to help someone who had drowned, how seconds could mean life or death. His mind replayed the steps quickly. Check breathing, start compressions, clear the airway. He leaned down and placed his ear close to Lily's mouth, listening for any sign of breath. There was nothing. Her body felt cold in the warm air. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst. Move! He barked when someone stepped too close, their shadow falling over Lily's face. He needed space. No one else was helping. They were only watching. He tilted her head back gently, opened her mouth, and checked for anything blocking her airway. Then, placing one hand over the other, he locked his elbows and began pushing down firmly on her chest. 1, 2, 3. He counted in his head, trying to match the rhythm he had learned. The first few compressions sent water trickling from the corner of her mouth, but still, she didn't move. Marcus's arms burned, but he didn't stop. Come on, Lily. Breathe, he muttered under his breath, his voice shaking. He leaned down, pinched her nose, and gave 2 breaths into her mouth, watching her chest rise. Then he went back to compressions, his wet hair dripping over his face. Samuel came running, his face pale. Marcus, he started, but stopped when he saw his son working with calm precision. Samuel knelt beside him, ready to help if needed, but he didn't interrupt. He could see that Marcus knew what he was doing. Finally, Lily's father appeared, pushing through the crowd. His eyes widened at the sight of his daughter lying lifeless on the tiles, Marcus pressing on her chest. What happened? He shouted, his voice cracking for the first time that day. She fell in, Marcus said quickly, not stopping his work. She wasn't breathing when I got her out. I'm trying to. He didn't finish the sentence. He just kept pressing, his mind focused on the rhythm, the hope that the next breath might be the one to bring her back. The silence around them felt heavy, broken only by the sound of Marcus's hands hitting her chest and his quick breaths as he worked. Every second stretched into an eternity. He remembered the instructor saying, "You keep going until help arrives or they start breathing again." There was no help here yet, no ambulance, no lifeguard, just him and the girl who had once smiled at him from her window. Then, after what felt like forever, Lily coughed. It was weak at first, just a tiny, wet sound. Marcus froze for half a second, his heart leaping, then quickly turned her onto her side. A rush of water spilled from her mouth onto the tiles. She coughed again, harder this time, and gasped for air. The sound was the most beautiful thing Marcus had ever heard. The crowd let out a collective breath, and a few people began clapping in relief, though most were still in shock. Samuel put a hand on Marcus's shoulder, his grip firm and proud. Lily's father dropped to his knees beside her, his eyes glassy. Lily, it's okay, you're safe now, he said, though his voice trembled as if he didn't quite believe it himself. Lily's eyelids fluttered, and she looked around weakly. Her gaze found Marcus, and for a moment the noise around them faded. Her lips moved, trying to form words, but only a faint "thank you" escaped. Marcus gave her a small, shaky smile. Someone finally thought to call an ambulance, and voices began shouting instructions. Towels were brought to wrap around her shivering body. Marcus sat back, his arms aching, his clothes clinging to him like ice. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Around him, the adults talked in hushed tones. Some praised his quick action. Others whispered in disbelief that the only one who had acted fast enough was the son of an employee. Marcus didn't care what they said. His eyes stayed on Lily, watching the small rise and fall of her chest, making sure she was still breathing. The party was over now. The music had been switched off, the barbecue left forgotten, the bright afternoon turning heavy with the weight of what could have been a tragedy. Lily's father sat close to her, holding her hand, but every few moments his eyes flicked to Marcus. There was something unreadable in his gaze, a mix of shock, gratitude, and perhaps a dawning realization. Marcus sat on the ground, water still dripping from his hair, his heartbeat slowly calming. The crowd began to thin as some guests left, muttering excuses. But Marcus didn't move. He stayed there, close enough to step in again if something went wrong, ready to do whatever it took. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just the gardener's son. He was the one who had saved the millionaire's daughter. Marcus's breathing was still uneven, his chest rising and falling quickly as he knelt beside Lily. The world around him felt like it was moving in slow motion. The air was thick with heat, and his wet clothes clung to his skin, heavy and cold against the warm afternoon. His muscles ached from swimming and pressing on her chest, but his mind stayed sharp. He knew she wasn't safe yet. She needed to be kept warm, needed a doctor. But for now, she was breathing, and that was all that mattered. Someone handed him a towel, but he barely noticed. His eyes were locked on Lily's pale face, watching the small movements of her chest. The sound of her breathing was weak but steady, like the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. Every few seconds, he checked to make sure she hadn't slipped back into silence. The crowd was still gathered around, though their earlier shock had shifted into murmurs and whispers. Some guests spoke in low voices, glancing at Marcus as if they couldn't believe what they'd just seen. Others were already telling the story to anyone who would listen, adding their own details to make it sound as if they had been part of the rescue. Samuel stood close, his eyes full of pride and worry. He reached out, placing a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You did good, son," he said quietly. The words were simple, but Marcus felt the weight of them. Samuel wasn't one to hand out easy praise, and in that moment, it was enough to make Marcus stand a little taller, even with exhaustion pressing down on him. Richard, Lily's father, finally seemed to have shaken off the shock. He crouched down beside his daughter, his large hand covering hers. "Lily, sweetheart, I'm here," he murmured, his voice softer than anyone in the room had ever heard. He looked up at Marcus, and their eyes met. There was no hostility in Richard's gaze now, only something heavy and unreadable. Gratitude, maybe, or a kind of guilt. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't need thanks. He only cared that Lily was alive. But still, part of him wondered if this moment would change anything. Would Richard see him differently now? Or would things go back to how they always were? A wall between the world of the rich and the world of the workers? The sound of sirens began to approach in the distance. Someone had finally called an ambulance, and the guests seemed to relax slightly, as if the professionals would now take over. But Marcus knew those first few minutes in the water had been the most important. If he hadn't acted, there would be nothing for the paramedics to save. Before the ambulance arrived, Lily's body shivered under the damp towel. Marcus leaned closer, speaking softly so only she could hear. "It's okay now. You're safe." Her eyes opened halfway and she gave the faintest nod. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Still, Marcus understood. She didn't need to say the words for him to know she was thanking him. The paramedics rushed in, their bright uniforms a sharp contrast to the muted colors of the party. They worked quickly, checking Lily's pulse, her breathing, and asking rapid questions. Marcus stepped back to give them space, but he stayed close enough to watch. One of the paramedics glanced at him and said, "You pulled her out?" Marcus nodded, and the man gave him a short, respectful look before continuing his work. As they prepared to take Lily to the hospital, Richard insisted on riding with her. He bent down, pressing a kiss to her forehead, then turned to Marcus again. For a second, it looked like he might say something. His mouth opened, but instead he simply gave a small nod, the kind of nod that carried more weight than words. The ambulance doors closed and the sirens faded into the distance. The yard felt strangely empty now, the laughter and music from earlier completely gone. Samuel began gathering the scattered chairs and towels, his movements slow and thoughtful. Marcus stood still for a long moment, staring at the place where Lily had fallen in. The water was calm now, the sun still glinting off its surface, hiding the danger it had held only minutes ago. Some guests came up to him, offering quick words of praise before leaving. "That was brave, young man. You saved her life." Not many would have reacted so fast. He nodded politely to each, but their words didn't sink in. His mind was still replaying the moment he'd seen her sinking, the rush of cold water, the weight of her in his arms. Samuel came over and handed him a fresh towel. "Go change into something dry before you catch a cold," he said, though his voice had a softer edge than usual. Marcus nodded but didn't move right away. His body felt heavy, but his thoughts were even heavier. Later, after most of the guests had gone, Marcus helped his father clean up the yard. The untouched food was put away, and the music system was switched off. The place looked almost as if nothing had happened, but Marcus knew things were not the same. For him, the day had shifted something inside, a realization that sometimes doing the right thing meant stepping forward even when no one else moved. That evening, as he sat outside the small cottage with Samuel, the air was cooler and the sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink. Samuel lit a small lamp, its glow soft against the growing shadows. "You know," Samuel said, breaking the silence, "people with money, they're used to controlling everything. But today, you were the one in control. Remember that." Marcus didn't answer right away. He thought about Lily's face when she first opened her eyes again, the fragile whisper of her thanks, and the way her father had looked at him afterward. He didn't know what the coming days would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't forget the feeling of pulling her out of the water, of refusing to give up when everyone else stood still. The quiet of the evening settled around them, and for the first time that day, Marcus allowed himself to feel the exhaustion fully. His body ached, his arms were sore, but deep inside there was a small, steady flame of pride. He had saved a life, not just anyone's life, but the life of someone who had never truly been part of his world, yet somehow had always mattered to him. The ambulance had been gone for almost half an hour, but Marcus still felt the echo of sirens in his ears. The pool area was quiet now, with only the sound of water lapping softly against the tiles. Most of the guests had left, but the ones who remained whispered in small groups, glancing at Marcus now and then. He didn't pay them much attention. His mind was still stuck in those moments underwater, the cold grip of Lily's hand in his, and the weight of her body as he pulled her toward the surface. Samuel had gone inside the mansion to speak with one of the senior staff members, leaving Marcus alone near the pool. He sat on the edge, his bare feet dangling into the cool water. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, but the heat still clung to his skin. His wet clothes had dried in uneven patches, leaving him feeling sticky and tired. Yet he stayed there, staring at the calm blue surface, as if watching it might somehow explain how something so peaceful could turn deadly in an instant. A faint sound of footsteps made him turn. One of the kitchen staff, a young woman named Rosa, approached holding a mug. "You need this," she said, handing it to him. It was hot tea, the steam curling into the air. He took it with a small nod. "Thanks," he murmured. Rosa smiled faintly. "I saw what you did. Most people would have frozen. You didn't." She patted his shoulder before heading back inside. He sipped the tea slowly, the warmth soothing his throat. He remembered the moment he'd started chest compressions, how quiet it had been, how every second had felt like a lifetime. If he had hesitated even for a little, Lily might not be alive now. That thought made his stomach twist. The stillness was broken when Samuel returned, his expression unreadable. He walked over and sat beside Marcus, both of them looking out at the water without speaking for a while. Finally, Samuel said, "They're taking her to the best hospital in the city. She's going to be okay. The doctors said you saved her life." Marcus didn't answer right away. He let the words sink in, then asked quietly, "Did her dad say anything?" Samuel hesitated, then shrugged. "He's not a man who talks much about feelings, but he knows what you did. That's enough for now." Marcus thought about Richard's face earlier, the shock, the way his eyes had locked on him. It was strange to think that just this morning, Richard probably saw him as nothing more than the gardener's boy. Now, whether he liked it or not, Marcus had become part of a story that would stay in the family's memory forever. As the sun dipped lower, long shadows stretched across the poolside. Samuel stood up and said they should head home, but Marcus lingered for a moment longer. He looked at the exact spot where Lily had gone under, the spot that had almost been her last. He promised himself silently that if he was ever near her again, he wouldn't let her get so close to danger. They walked back to their small cottage, the gravel crunching under their feet. Inside, the familiar scent of home, old wood, clean laundry, and Samuel's worn leather jacket, felt comforting. Marcus changed into dry clothes, then sat at the small kitchen table while Samuel heated up leftover stew. Neither of them spoke much. The day's events hung heavy between them, each lost in their own thoughts. After dinner, Marcus stepped outside into the cooling night air. The stars were beginning to appear, tiny pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. He leaned against the porch railing, closing his eyes for a moment. He could still feel the resistance of the water against his body, the way Lily's hair had floated around her face, her eyes wide with fear. And then, the sound of her coughing, the rush of relief. It was burned into him like something he'd never be able to forget. A sudden voice broke his thoughts. Marcus. He turned to see one of Richard's drivers standing at the gate. The man approached and said, "Mr. Richard wants to see you. Now." Marcus's stomach tightened. He wasn't sure if this was going to be a thank you or something else entirely. He followed the driver back to the mansion, his footsteps quick but uncertain. Inside, the place was quieter than he'd ever heard it. The big hallways echoed with their footsteps. They stopped outside Richard's private study, and the driver knocked softly before opening the door. Richard was standing near a large desk, looking out the window. The warm glow of a desk lamp cast shadows across the room. "Come in," Richard said, without turning around. Marcus stepped inside, his hands at his sides. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Richard finally faced him. His eyes looked different now, tired, softer, but still sharp. "I heard every detail of what you did," he said slowly, "from the moment you saw her fall to when she took her first breath again." He walked closer, stopping just a few feet away. "If you hadn't been there," his voice trailed off as if he didn't want to finish the sentence. Marcus stayed quiet. He didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound awkward. "You acted faster than anyone else. You didn't think about who she was, who you are, or what anyone might say. You just acted." Richard's jaw tightened, and for the first time, Marcus thought he saw real emotion flicker in the man's eyes. "I owe you more than I can ever repay." There was another pause, and then Richard reached into a drawer, pulling out a small envelope. He placed it on the desk. "This is for you. It's not charity, it's gratitude, and it's a promise that if you ever need anything, you come to me." Marcus looked at the envelope but didn't reach for it. "I didn't do it for money," he said quietly. "I know," Richard replied. "That's why it means more." For a moment, they simply stood there, two people from very different worlds bound together by the events of the day. Then Richard said, "When Lily comes home, she'll want to see you. I think she'll feel safer knowing you're around." Marcus nodded once. "I'll be here." As he left the study, he felt a strange mix of pride and uncertainty. The day had started with him carrying towels and clearing tables. It had ended with him saving a life and standing face to face with a man who had likely never seen him before as more than a worker's son. When he stepped outside, the night air felt cooler, fresher. The stars were brighter now, scattered across the black sky. For the first time all day, Marcus let himself take a deep breath, knowing that whatever happened next, he had done something that no one could take away from him. Lily was taken to the hospital that evening, and news about her accident spread quickly among the people who had been at the party. By nightfall, almost everyone in the neighborhood knew what had happened, and that Marcus, the gardener's son, had saved her life. But Marcus didn't feel like a hero. He sat quietly in their small cottage, thinking about the way her body had felt limp in his arms, the cold water closing in around them, and the long seconds before she coughed again. Those images kept playing in his mind over and over. Samuel noticed his son's silence. He didn't push him to talk, but stayed nearby, working on small tasks to keep the room from feeling too heavy. The radio was on low, but Marcus wasn't really listening. He kept staring at the floor, lost in thought. Every so often, he would hear the faint sound of Lily's cough in his memory, and it made his chest tighten. The next morning, Samuel had to leave early for work on the estate, and Marcus followed, though his body still felt sore from the day before. When they arrived, the mansion was strangely quiet. There were no guests, no loud music, no smell of cooking food. The pool area looked spotless, as if the accident had never happened, but Marcus couldn't look at it for long. His eyes moved away almost immediately. He was carrying tools toward the garden when one of the maids, a kind woman named Maria, stopped him. "She's asking for you," Maria said softly. Marcus frowned. "Who?" he asked, though he already knew. "Lily," Maria replied. "She's in the hospital, but she told her father she wants to see you." The words left Marcus frozen for a moment. He hadn't expected that. A part of him thought that once she was safe, the family would move on and forget about the boy who had pulled her from the water. But now, hearing that she had asked for him, a strange warmth spread through his chest. Richard was standing on the porch when Marcus approached. The millionaire looked different today. No suit, no busy phone calls. He was wearing a simple shirt and looked like he hadn't slept much. His eyes met Marcus's, and for a moment they just stood there. Then Richard said, "She wants to see you. I'll take you." The drive to the hospital was silent except for the hum of the car. Marcus sat in the back seat, looking out the window, half his thoughts tangled. He wondered what he would say to her, if she would even remember everything that had happened. When they arrived, Richard led him through the white hallways to a private room. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, and the steady beeping of medical equipment echoed softly. Lily was lying in the bed, a blanket pulled up to her waist. Her hair was tied back, and her skin was still pale, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He stepped closer, unsure whether to smile or stay serious. "How are you feeling?" he asked quietly. She gave a small smile. "Alive, because of you." He shook his head slightly. "You scared everyone," he said, trying to keep his tone light, but his voice carried the memory of the fear he'd felt. She looked at him for a long moment before saying, "I remember the water, and then you. I thought I wouldn't make it." Her hand, weak but steady, reached out toward him. Without thinking, he took it. Richard stood by the window, watching silently. For once, he didn't interrupt. They talked softly for a few minutes, about how she felt, about the hospital food she didn't like, and about how boring it was to be stuck in bed. But underneath it all was an unspoken truth. They both knew that what had happened had changed something between them forever. When it was time to leave, Lily didn't let go of his hand immediately. "Come back," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. "I will." Back at the mansion, Samuel was waiting for him. "How was she?" he asked. "Better," Marcus replied, and for the first time since the accident, his voice had a hint of relief in it. Over the next few days, Marcus went back to work, but things felt different. Some of the other workers looked at him with quiet respect now. A few even asked him to tell the story, though he always kept it short. He didn't like reliving the moment too much. One afternoon, while trimming the hedges near the front gate, Marcus saw a sleek black car pull in. Richard stepped out, carrying a small bag. "She's coming home tomorrow," Richard said, glancing at Marcus, "and she still wants to see you." The next day, the car returned with Lily inside. She was in her wheelchair again, a blanket over her lap, but she was smiling. The staff gathered to welcome her back, clapping politely. Her eyes searched the crowd until they found Marcus. She waved, and he gave a small wave back. That evening, Richard called Marcus into the study again. "I've been thinking about what you did," he said. "Not just that you saved her, but that you acted when no one else did. That's rare." He paused, his gaze steady. "From now on, you're welcome in this house, not just as Samuel's son, but as someone my daughter trusts." Marcus didn't know what to say. He simply nodded, feeling the weight of those words. Later, when he passed by Lily's room, the door was slightly open. She was sitting by the window, watching the sunset. He knocked softly, and she turned, her face lighting up. "You came," she said. "I told you I would," he replied. They sat together for a while, talking about small things, books, music, and the weather. But there was an ease between them now, a quiet understanding that didn't need to be spoken out loud. When Marcus left that night, the air outside was cool, and the stars had begun to appear. For the first time since the accident, he felt a sense of peace. She was safe. And somehow, despite the distance between their worlds, he knew this wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The next morning, the mansion felt different. The air was lighter, almost as if the heavy tension from the past days had finally lifted. Lily was back home, and though she was still weak, her laughter could already be heard faintly from her room. Marcus arrived with Samuel early, ready to help in the garden as usual. But before he could even start, one of the maids approached him with a small smile. "Mr. Richard wants to see you in his study," she said. Marcus wiped his hands on his trousers and followed her through the long hallway. His heart thudded with every step, unsure of what awaited him. When he entered the study, Richard was standing near the large window, looking out at the garden. Sunlight spilled into the room, making the polished desk shine. "Come in, Marcus," Richard said, turning toward him. His voice was calm, but held a weight that made Marcus stand straighter. Richard studied him for a moment, as if still trying to understand the boy who had saved his daughter. Then he gestured to the chair in front of the desk. Sit. Marcus sat, his hands resting on his knees. Richard leaned against the edge of the desk, arms crossed. I've been thinking about everything that happened, he began slowly. About how close I came to losing Lily. About how no one moved except you. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in seriousness. You didn't wait for permission. You didn't think about the danger. You just acted, and because of that, my daughter is alive. Marcus shifted slightly, unsure how to respond. I couldn't stand there and do nothing, he said softly. Richard nodded. That's exactly why it matters. You see, Marcus, there are people with all the money in the world, all the power, all the influence, but when a moment of truth comes, they freeze. You didn't. He walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick envelope. He placed it in front of Marcus. This is for your education. Whatever you want to study, wherever you want to go, this will help you get there. Marcus stared at the envelope but didn't reach for it. Sir, I didn't do it for money, he said quietly. Richard's voice softened. I know you didn't, but I'm giving this because you deserve it, and because I want you to know you're not just Samuel's boy who works in the garden anymore. You're part of this family's story now. There was a long pause. Marcus finally nodded and accepted the envelope, his fingers brushing the crisp paper. It wasn't the money that moved him. It was the fact that Richard had spoken to him like an equal, something that had never happened before. Richard smiled faintly, then added, Lily wants to see you. She's in the sunroom. Marcus stood and left the study, the envelope tucked under his arm. He walked through the mansion until he reached the bright sunroom at the back of the house. Large windows let in streams of golden light, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Lily was sitting in her wheelchair by the window, a soft blanket over her lap. Her hair fell over her shoulders, and she was smiling when she saw him. You came, she said warmly. I told you I would, Marcus replied, pulling up a chair beside her. They sat together, talking about little things at first, the weather, the flowers in the garden, the way the light hit the pool in the afternoon. But soon, Lily's voice grew softer. I keep thinking about that day, she said, the water, the fear, and then your face when you pulled me out. I don't know how to thank you. You already did, Marcus said with a small smile. You're here. That's enough for me. Lily's eyes shimmered, and she reached out to hold his hand. I don't care what anyone says about class or status, she whispered. You're my friend, and you always will be. They sat like that for a while, comfortable in the quiet. Outside, the garden was alive with birdsong, and a light breeze rustled the leaves. For Marcus, it felt like the world had slowed down just for them. When Samuel came to find him later, Marcus stood to leave. But before he walked out, Lily called after him. Marcus, he turned. Yes? She smiled. You didn't just save my life. You changed it. Her words stayed with him the rest of the day. As he walked home with Samuel, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the path, he felt a strange sense of belonging. He had stepped into a world that had always been out of reach, not because of money or privilege, but because of courage and instinct. In the days that followed, Marcus visited Lily often. They talked, laughed, and sometimes sat in silence, just enjoying the company. Richard would occasionally join them, and though he didn't say much, there was a new respect in his eyes whenever he looked at Marcus. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Marcus stood outside the mansion gates, looking back at the grand house. He knew life wouldn't suddenly become perfect or easy. There would still be differences between their worlds. But there was a bridge now, built not from wealth or status, but from a single moment when he refused to stand still while someone's life hung in the balance. And deep down, Marcus understood something important. No matter where life took him, this was the day that had defined him, the day he proved to himself and to everyone else that courage could come from anywhere, and that sometimes the person least expected to make a difference is the one who changes everything.